Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Dragon Sicilian beginning after e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6 begins the Dragon Variation of the Sicilian, and more specifically we're going to be taking a look at what's known as the Levenfish Variation of the Sicilian, which begins with the move pawn to f4. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So the idea behind the move pawn to f4 is to play this move pawn to e5. It's basically trying to play f4 to immediately play the move pawn to e5. Now this move actually contains a little bit of a trap, which is one of the reasons that it's very popular among club players, because if black falls into this trap, black can lose a massive amount of material very, very quickly. So if black just kind of closes his eyes and plays a move like, say, bishop g7 in this position, the move pawn to e5 has the potential to win a massive amount of material after two more very natural-looking moves from black. After d takes e5, f takes e5, and then say something simple like knight g4, bishop to b5 check would be completely winning. The whole point here is that if either piece blocks the check with, say, knight d7 or bishop d7, that knight on g4 is hanging to the queen, so queen takes g4 would simply win the knight. Or if we play this alternative move, king f8, white would win with a knight fork. Pause the video, see if you can find it. The move knight e6 simply wins the game. If we take the knight that is now forking our king and queen, we would simply lose the queen to queen captures queen because that queen is now completely free. So that's basically what makes people play the Levenfish Variation, is the potential to win these really early games with this really simple trap. So what should we do against this if we're playing the black pieces? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to open our eyes and realize that e5 is a threat, and we need to cover that e5 square with tempo. So we need to develop in a slightly different way. We need to play the move knight to c6, which covers the e5 square. Now here, what white should do is white should try to reinforce that e5 push, and he has one of two ways to try to do that. He can play knight takes c6, or he can retreat the knight. Now, most strong players will actually try to play knight c6 here, but what's interesting is maybe knight f3, even though on the surface it's an inferior move, might actually objectively be a little bit better, as these positions have a tendency to lead to equality, as opposed to knight c6, which seems to be slight advantage black in pretty much every line. So let's say that they retreat with this move knight f3, in order to play the move e5 anyway. Now the f3 knight is protecting the e5 square again, so white is in fact threatening to play the move pawn to e5. What should black do here? Black should just completely ignore this, because if white plays the move pawn to e5, he's going to be trying to open the position in a position where he's going to be down a lot in development. The knight moving from d4 to f3 is effectively an undeveloping move. The knight was developed on d4, and he's moving the same piece twice. He's moving it backwards. So here, black should just play bishop g7 and develop. Black has three pieces developed and white only has two. And if white insists on playing the move pawn to e5, now he's making a pawn move instead of moving a piece. Black should ignore this and just move his knight. Just play knight h5. He shouldn't take the pawn on e5 or do anything else. He should just move his knight. Now after a couple of simple moves, black could actually be quite a bit better here. If white continues with, say ed6, going for material and not trying to catch up in development, black would just castle, and then white could go for this extra pawn, and then after queen e7, this position should be considered decisive advantage black. The amount of development that white has lost in no way is compensated for by the one pawn that black is down. After, say, queen e2, we would simply play queen d8. The move rook e8 is a threat here, and black is completely, utterly winning in this position. So an example would be something like, say, bishop e3, rook e8, king f2, knight d4. There's not much here that white can try. White could try to counterpin with rook d1, and then black can pile on the pins with bishop g4. And then after, say, something simple like bishop d4, we could simply play bishop f3, queen f3, bishop d4, and white should probably just resign here. All of the escape squares for the king are covered. After something like rook d4, queen e3, queen e3 is mate, and the only alternative is queen e3, and then rook e3, and white should just resign. So basically, playing knight f3 with the idea of playing pawn to e5 is almost suicidal. Black is just up way too many tempos for white to continue wasting moves with pawn moves and pawn captures. But it is reasonable to maybe retreat this knight and then just kind of play a passive position with something like, say, bishop d3, castles, bishop g4. This position should be approximately level, even though I sort of prefer black's position here, because black is still up a couple of tempo in this position and has slightly better development, but white's position is by no means lost in this position. So going back, I think knight f3 is a reasonable try to get to some sort of equality for white. The other option is to try to play e5 through other means. Basically, the main idea that a lot of strong players use here is to capture this knight on c6 and then play the move pawn to e5. Now, after black retreats with knight d7, because we want to keep our pawn duo over here in the middle of the board, and white plays ed6, ed6, we have this position. Now, one of the things I want everyone to recognize in this position is on a positional level, black is doing quite a bit better here. If we get this bishop to the long diagonal and we manage to play d5 and we manage to castle, we can simply declare this position somewhere between slight edge to major advantage black. The reason for that is we have everything going for us on a positional level. We have a better center, we have a safe king, we have a bishop on a long diagonal putting pressure on white's queen side, and that pressure can be amplified with the open b-file. Black is just essentially doing great. This is everything you want out of the opening. Central dominance, strong pieces, etc. So the question is kind of, can white stop black from achieving this setup? Now the answer to that is, in modern, with the modern theory the way it is on this position, I don't think white really can. I think white is going to end up with some sort of disadvantage as long as black plays everything correctly. The main thing that people try here is stuff like queen d4, putting immediate pressure on the long diagonal. This actually makes sense. You're trying to make it harder for black to get everything set in place with a move like bishop g7 followed by d5 followed by castled. So black should reply with knight f6, blocking up that diagonal, and just preparing to finish his development with either bishop g7 or e7, followed by castles kingside. So here, pretty much bishop e3 is the move that universally gets played, even though computers seem to prefer the move bishop to d3. This move bishop d3 was actually tried a long time ago. It was tried in Bottarelli versus Mezzo, played in Canterbury back in 1973, and black just developed his bishop to the long diagonal. White played queen e3, and now black had the option to play either bishop e6 or queen e7, both of which appear to lead to slight edge black. Black opted to exchange the queens. Now the fact that he's not castled doesn't matter so much, because there's just not as much material on the board. And then after bishop d2, black played the really good move bishop f5, because as it turns out, it's actually just more important to get rid of white's light squared bishop, leaving him with this bad dark squared bishop, than it is that black has doubled pawns. So after castle's queenside, we have rook e8, bishop f5, gf5, and black's position was quite a bit better because this is a bad piece. The doubled pawns don't matter so much because nobody can get to them. And then black has good outposts, like say on the e4 square, and he has the solid pressure against the queen side. So what ended up happening in this game was white played rook e1 check, king d7, h3 to try to open up the king side, h5, and then knight d1, knight e4, putting the knight on a solid outpost, and then he just tried to undermine the outpost and make some exchanges, but this only helped black. Black just basically exchanged everything, consolidated a few pieces, got a passed pawn, and ended up with a much better position and went on to win the game. And this is generally what you should expect in these positions. Black is just doing a little bit better positionally in these lines, and isn't in any real trouble. And that's kind of why most people try this move bishop e3. The main idea is that you're more prepared to meet the move bishop g7. So kind of the main concept is you can put direct pressure on black's center with castle's queenside, and then after d5, you can at the very least prevent black from castling. So one idea would be something like queen e5 check, bishop e6, and then bishop c5, which prevents black from castling, but the computer still gives complete equality. After, say, rook e8, queen e1, queen c7, it gives as totally equal. But this is kind of a success story for white, because white has managed to keep the black king in the middle of the board. So black shouldn't play bishop g7 against bishop e3. Instead, what black should do is black should play bishop e7. This allows him to castle. And as it turns out, once black gets castled, we can basically declare these positions slight edge to major advantage black. So for example, after bishop e2, we would simply castle kingside. After castle's kingside, we could play d5, and I'm already willing to come out and say that this position should be major advantage black, just something this simple. And there doesn't really seem to be a great line here for white. It doesn't seem like we have a ton of alternatives. So other than queen d4, we can try bishop e3, but again, this doesn't put a huge amount of pressure on black's position. Black could simply play bishop e7, and then after, say, bishop d4, we could simply castle kingside. And again, we can already kind of declare this position as somewhere between slight edge to major advantage black. A sample line would be something like bishop e2. We would simply play rook b8. And there's just nothing here. The pawn on a7, which looks en prise, is really not capturable. If we capture this pawn, we could take on b2, and the weak dark squares and everything else going on is really going to favor black. So for example, castle's kingside, we would play d5, just going for this positional concept, c6, d5, and then the long diagonal, everything is great. Queen c1, rook b7, hitting the bishop, bishop d4, rook e8, bishop to f3, we would play rook b4, hitting that bishop, knight e2, bishop a6, and absolutely everything is hanging in this position. The dark squared bishop is under threat, the knight on e2 is pinned, black's center is super solid. This is just major advantage black all day long. Everything is just going incredibly well here. So what are some other things that we could try here? Just not a whole lot for white in terms of things that they can try. They could try here, they could try the move queen d2. It's reasonable to attempt this, and then after, say, knight f6, they would castle queenside, d5, h3, castles kingside. And I think that black's position is slightly better, but at least white has something to play for, kind of in the form of a kingside attack. He can continue with g4. But black's queenside attack should be just as, if not more powerful than white's kingside attack. So after, say, queen a5, queen d4, rook e8, bishop g2, knight d7, queen a4, queen takes a4, knight takes a4, bishop d6, bishop d2, knight b6. I would consider these positions slight edge black. Knight b6, a b6, king b1, b5 is clearly a little bit better for black in this endgame. Black has the better center, he's got the better pawn structure, but at least white's not at a major disadvantage in these positions, which of course isn't saying a whole lot about the opening, that you're hoping for a position where you're slightly worse, where black just has a better center and you're just kind of scrambling for some sort of draw. But this might be a better way to go than, say, the queen d4 lines or the bishop e3 to bishop d4 lines. But anyways, that's basically how you should handle the Levenfish variation in a nutshell. When they play this move pawn to f4, you need to play this move knight to c6 and control the e5 square. You're going to be meeting knight c6, bc6, e5 with knight d7, ed6, ed6. Keeping this idea in mind of just you need to get your bishop out, you need to get your king castled, you need to play d5, and at that point you should have some sort of positional advantage. Or if they play this the other way, if they bring their knight back to the f3 square, you should just continue developing with a move like bishop to g7, and your position should be at least equal. So I hope that you found this video helpful, I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.